but they had two seismic events that like really turned the tide against them. I honestly think that insolvencies usually happen because of like the wrong people in the wrong seats at the wrong time.
So today we have Andy Curtin, the founder and CEO of Construction Wave, on the podcast. I'm really excited to have you here. Today we're going to be speaking about a few high-profile insolvencies and a few of the stories that you've covered over the last year or so. So happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Delighted to hope the podcast is going well. I've seen it across the channels quite a bit, so no thanks. Delighted to come in.
Great, good stuff. So yeah, I think we might as well jump straight in. Obviously, being a media publication focused purely on construction, you've obviously covered and been exposed to a number of high-profile insolvencies and done some really strong think pieces or research pieces on those companies. Which of those companies sort of stands out, and would you like to kind of share more about that story here today?
I think the key one is a year on. There's ISG, obviously. And then it was just a seismic event last year. And it just sent shockwaves through the industry and the supply chain. And we can get more into it in a while. But yeah, that's obviously a really, really seismic event. That was going into August, September 2024. And then towards the end of last year, then you had Reedy Construction, who they're not as big as ISG, but still quite a big supply chain. So yeah, that was one we can get into a bit more. And obviously, just a couple of months back, we had Ardmore Construction, and I will point out it's Ardmore Construction Limited, not Ardmore Group. I think, in fairness to Ardmore, they seem to get a lot of slack that about their group, the whole group falling down, but it's just Ardmore Construction Limited. It's a subsidiary. Still, obviously, a very significant fall, but I just want to get that out there.
Yep. Yeah. Great. So where would you like to start?
If you don't mind, I'd like to just actually start with ISG.
Okay.
And I know you probably we could go have a whole podcast on this. But and I'm not tap myself on the back or anything, but I wrote an article in August 2024.
Okay.
And I just kind of dug into the data. And just to go back, I've become a small bit of a geek on the ISG collapse. But I don't write that many articles anymore. I'm not a journalist by trade, but I like writing. But I wrote an article in August 2024, and then a month later they collapsed. And the title of the article I wrote a month prior was "The Rise and Fall of ISG."
Oh, wow.
And it's crazy, the article actually didn't get that much traction.
At the time,
and then the day before ISG unfortunately fell into administration, it just went absolutely gangbusters. It's you're just looking at Google Analytics going from 30 to 40 to 50,000 views, which is a lot for trade publications, and the number kept going up and up. It's to be honest, there's no great satisfaction. People think as a media company, we're kind of rubbing our hands with joy. It's not really. It's a free article. I'm not here promoting the article. You can just go on and look for free. I have nothing to sell here. But I think what the research in the article, after digging, ISG, if you go back in time, if you don't mind me, Gabriel, if I just go back in time, they started as a carve out to Stanhope, who are a developer you might see around the city, Stanhope Developments, and they started mainly on fit out, as a fit out company, and then they went through the 90s some nice growth, from 10 million to 20 million through the 90s, and then they rebranded to they started a different name to ISG. I think it was Stand Up Interiors or something like that. And they went public kind of later in the 90s and rebranded to ISG. And then they started to go international. They started to move into different companies and become a global construction company with various different markets throughout the world. And to be honest, they were doing well. Like they were, like, I would say ISG people kind of shit on them now. Is it okay if I say the odd one? Sorry. Excuse my language, but people give out about ISG a lot now. But they actually had some really, really like important projects, you know, that they've worked on around the city, and they set the standard, especially in the fit out industry, for others to follow. You know, one of their key projects I love is the Broadgate. Is the Broadgate Circle there by Liverpool Street Station, just behind it. I think it's called Broadgate, but that's the one. And then, yeah, they successfully kind of grew the company, and then like they started to hit some trouble kind of going into the 2010s. Like, people love to give out about ISG and stuff like that, and I said I'm not advocating for ISG, but they had two seismic events that like really turned the tide against them. One was the British Volt factory. It was a massive, you know, mega 100 to 300 million pound project that like the developer more or less went into administration, so that order book collapsed, and I believe that was in 2022. And then they had a studio in Hertfordshire, Sunset Studios I think it was called, which is, I believe, was around a 600 million project, was also delayed and subsequently don't think went ahead. So you had this massive order book which you've built a whole company around for the next couple of years, and no matter what size you are in construction, that type of loss in an order book is really going to turn the tide against you.
Just to jump in there, was that was 2010s when they started to kind of branch out from fit out, or had they sort of started branching out much earlier?
Yeah, they've started branching out earlier. They moved into different companies offering different services. So yeah, they were just became a diverse array of main contracting services. And then in 2016 they were acquired, a major investment by Catex's, I think that's how you pronounce it, like an investment fund that bought into ISG, and then they turned it around for a while. They got some good leadership in, and then they really did turn things around, because I said the 2010s were a bit up and down, and then they got it going for a while again, and all of a sudden, 21, 22, those major projects that aforementioned, they stalled or got cancelled. Then you're left with this massive order book. You've hired ahead of time to fulfill the order, and on top of 2022, your Ukraine war happened. You're off the back of Brexit. You're off the back of COVID. Things started to tighten down, and material prices are going through the roof. Inflation's going through the roof. So it just all happened at once, really. So that was kind of the beginning of the end. And like, I'm not here advocating for ISG or anything, and I know they went down with like a major creditor list, like a really, really high creditor list. Like, I won't even get into it, but like, it's hundreds of millions owed, and I'm not going to get into it and advocate, but I'm just saying they were definitely hit with some blows that like no company could withstand.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And even touching on the supply chain there, I've met many a contractor who said they've gone through some tough times over the last few years due to the impact that the ISG collapse had on them. And that's sometimes further, 4 or 5 tiers below ISG. So it really did have a massive ripple effect through the industry.
Yeah, what kind of stuff, like, we don't have to talk about ISG in general, but like some of your clients, like what do they talk about when it comes to these collapses?
Yeah, so I think, further down the supply chain, similarly, they've got this big order book from ISG. Some of them have given discounts on current projects, for example, in anticipation of getting this future work. That the current work obviously is not completed, and they have payments outstanding, and that order book that they've also started to staff and grow the company to be able to achieve. Essentially is also now gone out the window. So it has a big impact on sort of their financial stability as a company. Fortunately, most of the companies I've met have managed to bounce back.
Yeah.
But yeah, just as it affected ISG and the 3,000 or so employees, that's also the same impact that it has for a good hundreds of companies in their supply chain. And obviously some of those companies haven't been as fortunate. And I would assume that a good amount of them have also gone out of business because of that.
Yeah, completely. And I don't think any of these companies, I really don't think they entered into contracts not wanting to pay people. They know, like they're, don't quote me, I think it was the British Volt factory that was the key kind of developer around that had issues and administrative issues. But like, I really don't think they went out to kind of screw their supply chain. Sometimes, like, you've just to realise there's someone above ISG again, and potentially there's someone above their developer again. So it's a complex supply chain. But anyways, in August, September 2024, they did enter administration. And earlier in 2024, they had their CFO and CEO leave the company, I believe. So like, that's always a sign that things are happening. They got an extension then just last month for their again, this will probably hold podcast, but the liquidation process is fairly rigorous. People probably just see, it's been liquidated, but like, for people involved in the company, it's a rigorous process, just going through everything to try like not get 10 pence in the pound back for your supply chain. But they got an extension with the liquidators until 2026 to try recoup a lot of that money for their trade creditors. Again, they're not going to get a whole lot of it back, but they're trying. If we move on to Reedy is an interesting one, because in 2023 they're around a £400 million contractor. They were profitable in 2023, albeit the profit nearly dropped by significant amount. I think it went from like 13 or 14 million to 8 million in maybe operating profit from 22 to 23. And the shareholders significantly reduced their dividend to kind of compensate that. So they were profitable, operating profit, and they were winning projects. And it's actually one I probably didn't expect to happen so soon. I felt it kind of came out of, it came quite quickly. Maybe it's because the ISG one and the Reedy one were quite close. Maybe people weren't talking about it as much. I think the problem I have with Reedy, and I think again, it might be more on just the management of the project side, but just mainly on the Reedy side. I guess one part about Reedy that, like, they came out with a statement that errors in their supply chain. I think that's it's a tiny bit harsh to like just come out publicly in a statement and just say it's errors in our supply chain caused a lot of the pressure as well as other externalities.
And when they say errors in their supply chain, what did they mean?
I can't tell you exactly what they meant. Like, they meant in the release, because it's a small bit more, vague. Like, these things tend to be a small bit more vague to cover things up. Not cover things up, but like just to be fairly neutral about it. I think like supply chain errors, well, we can interpret this any way you want, but like, I don't think it's that fair to come out when you're gone into administration and just say that lead with your supply chain errors, because I know a couple of good companies that worked there as well, and there's some really nice family businesses who we probably both know, and very fine businesses, and they just it just felt like they were, it feels like with that statement they were blamed. So it was one of the leading things is supply chain errors going to cause a lot of disruption.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's quite bad because like if if you go into administration, and stuff, and you can have different externalities that affect that, but like don't leave the supply chain, not in the press release anyway, it just doesn't come across well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, all these companies as well, these main contractors, like they have heavy relationships with banks and stuff like that. And this just not really, but like in general, like people don't realize like a lot of these, because construction payments are obviously, as you know,
Delayed.
so it's just delayed all the time. But like you have kind of vicious cycle wheels in with banks because you're maybe have invoice financing for different type of contracts. And the vicious thing about invoice financing and all these different credit facilities, like if you're not using them, the bank are going to like take them away. So like why would they just give it to you for free if you're not using it?
Yeah,
So like,
of course.
so you're going this vicious cycle is that if we don't use different facilities, then we don't have the option anymore. So that means if we have tough times, we can't use a facility. So it's just this vicious flywheel.
Even in good times.
Yeah. So you end up being under pressure from your bank and under pressure from your supply chain, and all the different factors. So I think with the learning from really is like, and maybe you probably know it more than me about this, Gabriel, is like the transparencies in supply chain. Like how can we not get our supply chains not to be pointing fingers at each other, when stuff goes wrong. I think you're probably more of an expert on this than me.
Yeah, I think this is a good topic. This actually came up in our last episode with Ben Walker from Gava, which is, if you look at most contractor subcontractor relationships, it's kind of like opposite sides of a table. Whenever it comes to a dispute, it's pointing fingers who got what wrong. And he was suggesting an approach, and I've kind of heard this come up a few times in a few different rooms, where we kind of need to change that mindset as a whole in the industry and have main contractor and subcontractor on the same side of the table, kind of trying to address problems and get to the end goal for both sides. Like nobody wins if the project doesn't get completed. So if they kind of change their approach and look at it, it's like, hey, we're on the same side here and we're trying to ensure that this project is completed to the best quality, within budget, and in a good amount of time, that will probably resolve a lot of these issues that we see, and and these after the fact issues when companies actually go out of business, and start to potentially point fingers at their supply chain. So I think there's and this is way bigger than us. I think there's a mindset shift that's needed across the industry, where we're working together more as collaborators rather than like people on the opposite side of the table.
Yeah, like it's tough to go pointing fingers and stuff with supply chain. You just wonder sometimes when companies do, and like really aren't the first company to blame their supply chain errors. There's way more, but just for the topic of this conversation, we'll stay on it. But like some of these, you might have been working for years together. Do you know? Do you know like and you might have been good mates. Like you, of course. Do you know? It's just like things can end very very sour like that. But like I don't want to make like this podcast too much doom and gloom either. Like insolvencies have slowed. There has been some smaller and sad ones, of course, but like compared to last year, it has slowed down, and it's good to have a slowdown because people probably don't realize the pressure collapses put on the bond market. So like contractors trying to access bonds to like help them win work and stuff like that. It's just like it was a huge issue last year. I wouldn't say it's that much easier, but it just takes a bit of pressure off the bond market and different financial markets, and people just think sometimes a collapse is a collapse and another one gone, but actually puts behind the scenes, it puts a huge amount of pressure on the whole financial system.
But you mentioned earlier that we've actually started to see a bit of a uptake in the market and a reduction in insolvencies. What does it actually look like right now?
Yeah, so as much as this insolvencies are coming down, in June, like April, May, June, it's been around the 300 mark, and that's each month. So there's thousands of insolvencies across the whole industry every year because it's the second biggest industry and one of the most volatile. but compared to 2024, that's about 15% down. So like the monthly figures there, it's about 16% down. It'll be interesting to see what it's like in December. You know, I think it was Danielle or Rory. I believe it was Danielle did an article on this in July, August time. So we'll just look at that as well in December just to see how much it has plummeted then. I imagine it'll go down more and more again. I think when you think there's like if we put a number on it, it's like on average, just say there's 300 a month or something like that, or 250 a month. That's 250 a month is 3,000 a year. You know, if you decrease that by 15% and a minimum, that's already a big reduction. So we expect it to be a bit more, but yeah, 15% down compared to last year.
That's great news. What do you think's maybe driving that? Do you think like companies are learning from the lessons of these high profile insolvencies? Do you think generally financial cash flow management are now more important topics at some of these growing firms?
I think like I honestly think that insolvencies usually happen because of like the wrong people in the wrong seats at the wrong time. You know, and I think construction has this kind of do a bit stubborn old school attitude is like, oh, we can get through this, we got through it before. But the reality is nobody has kind of faced some of these challenges before and like getting close to insolvency. You just think you can ride it out. Whereas the best advice I got from, it's actually Begbie's trainer and who are one of the key insolvency companies in the space. The lady said to me that if they only came to me 6 months earlier, we could have had a look at this, you know. But and it's easy to say in hindsight, but the reality is they know 6 months earlier that things aren't looking good, you know. But they're like, okay, we can do it, we can drive through this, you know. We've done it before. The reality is when you get that close to the edge, you need an extra bit of support. And I think the companies, focus on profit. I think the companies are starting to focus more on profit than turnover, and construction loves the turnover vanity metrics, you know. And I think companies are starting to maybe realise that maybe smaller and boutique are better, is a better strategy. And I think so, especially subcontractors are maybe getting a bit more power than they have been before. They know they're just starting to be a bit more choosy with the main contractor, slightly more choosy, which helps, because what I find about construction is a very beholden industry where you're very always depending on someone someone above. And like there's no question, Gabriel, like that the influence of tech in the industry is helping, you know. I think especially companies maybe 50 million plus, maybe below that is still a bit maybe ledgers and papers, but there's platforms these companies are starting to get on. Their tech stacks are starting to improve. They have a more visual outlook of the industry. I definitely think that's working. I can't put a number on that or anything like that. I think there's definitely some key players helping out on that. I also think from a legislation point of view, with the new policies and kind of hype and expectation around retentions and stuff like that, that companies are starting to realize, okay, I can't screw over my supply chain as much, and then the main contractors and developers are like, okay, we can't screw over supply chain much either, because this is just going to come across the whole industry, you know. For anyone who doesn't know what a retention is, for example, if I've £100 million a year company and if I have 2 million in retention, that means my client has £2 million of my money until the project is completed. The issue with that is when is the project fully completed, you know, because it could go on for years, and that small business or the £100 million business, not exactly small, but they're still paying that tax on that 200 or that £2 million retention, even though they don't have the money yet. So all these things are starting to kind of come into favour of supply chain in the industry, and not just supply chain, but I think it'll improve the whole industry. It just might take a bit of time. Totally. I know that's a long-winded answer, but I just think there's a few different factors.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to take away from that. I think it's great to see that there's a positive reduction in the number of insolvencies, and from what you're seeing, there's a few different contributing factors to that. I think one thing that we're seeing on our end is obviously there's kind of a bit of a shift right now, right? Most of the construction companies that are quite prominent right now are owned or were started by sort of people in the baby boomer generation, you could say, and a lot of those companies are starting to be handed down to a millennial generation who have a lot of exposure to what's happened over the last 20 or so years, and are coming into construction or coming into management more specifically, and really looking at how they can avoid that happening again. So I think we're definitely about to see a turn in the industry, where companies' management teams are a lot more on the ball when it comes to cash flow management, financial planning and analysis, forecasting, essentially all of the activity that will prevent a company getting so close to the edge in the future.
Yeah, I think with the generational thing, that has its issues as well. Is the second or third generation have the hunger that the person at the very start,
pros and cons.
Yeah, so definitely say on the tech side, it's a lot more savvy in general. And I think it's interesting how tech just kind of, the last couple of years has really revved up, which is good.